Hello, my name is Jennie Beeson. I'm the Program Associate at the National Youth Advocacy Coalition, and this is part 2 of your Safe Spaces training module for creating safe spaces for LGBTQ youth. Now, one thing before we get started, I want to make sure is that you get out your worksheet that you can access on the web page. It's the Safe Spaces training module worksheet. This training module is going to be heavy in using that. And one other thing is that you might want to watch this module in full screen. So in the lower corner of the video, you might want to touch full screen. So the first thing when we're talking about creating safe spaces for LGBTQ youth is to address our attitudes. And those are the things, and so we're going to look at the things that can affect your attitudes or can affect the way you think about LGBTQ youth. So first we're going to do a little thought journey and make sure to have your worksheet out. I'm going to go through kind of leading you through a meditation, and then you can record your own reactions. So after I go through this, I encourage you to push pause. So go ahead and imagine yourself leaving the room and going back in time. And this helps if you close your eyes. We are going to go back in time to when you were 16 years old. What year was it? Where did you live? Was it a house or an apartment? Did you live alone? With family? With friends? Did you have a job? Were you in school or just hanging out? Did you have a nickname? What did your hair look like? What kind of music did you like? Who were your friends? How did you feel about adults? Who did you trust? Were you in love? Did you have sex yet? Did you use protection? Did you experiment with alcohol or drugs? How much? What were your feelings about sexuality? Did you know anyone who was gay? Did you experience illness or death? Did you use protection? Did you experiment? What was that like? Take a moment to remember these things about being 16. Now imagine there was a thing called HIV when you were 16. Do you think you would be aware of it? Who could you talk to? What would it take for you to understand your risks? What would it take with someone about your sex life? Drug use? Sexual orientation? Who could you talk to about your fears about sex? What would you need in order to make a decision about getting counseling? What would you do if you discovered you were HIV positive at 16? What would you do if you were homeless? If you were without any money? If you had no positive role models? What would you do if your best friend was having the same problems? Take a moment to think about all these possibilities and press pause. When you're ready, bring your awareness back into the room, and you can press and go ahead and record your reactions to this. Now I want you to go ahead and take a look at your worksheet after you have written down all of your reflections on this exercise on your worksheet. And we're going to go over what we hope to accomplish in this training section. We want to start the thought process about examining our own misconceptions and values, and we want to establish a critical thinking framework. And then we want to make sure to provide the resources that you need to continue your thinking on these issues. So attitudes, what makes up our attitudes? And here are some things that I have listed that make up attitudes, although these obviously aren't the only things, but some of those include assumptions, the way we operate, the kind of initial judgments we make, There's sympathy, who you feel sympathetic towards, who you care for. Your understanding, what is your depth of understanding of different people who are different than you? And respect. It's no matter who anyone is, how do you show respect? So when we look at misconceptions, I think this is a good place to start. So by looking at attitudes through a lens of misconceptions, you can kind of understand where they're coming from. So go ahead and grab your worksheet again and be as honest as you can about acknowledging something that may be true for you is one of the initial parts of your process, to just be honest. So in your worksheet, you have a list from 1 to 5 that you can go through and write down maybe misconceptions that people have made that you know about LGBTQ youth, of youth of color, of low-income youth, of youth with disabilities, of any youth that might not be considered whatever it means to be normal. So once you've written those down and you've started again, you need to be honest with yourself, to check yourself. Look at your list. Where did those misconceptions come from? Where did those ideas come from? Why do you think people hold those ideas? And who is benefiting? And if there is something that you truly believe, is it something that you could change your mind about? That's something you're open to thinking about in a different way? Go ahead and take a minute to push pause and write down what you feel about these assumptions that are made about youth that might be damaging. Right now, so next we're going to go through some values. And so when we talk about values in terms of LGBTQ youth, we want to talk about the difference between identifying strategies for balancing your personal views with your professional responsibilities. You might have ideas around what it is to be LGBT or any different identity, but you have to be able to balance that with being able to be safe to LGBTQ youth, and you want to reduce your adherence to the stereotypes and myths that we might have just identified in the last section. So this is an exercise that can be the first step to a deeper self-exploration. And after this one as well, you might want to push pause and take a minute to understand where they come from and write down your reactions. So go ahead and close your eyes again and think about these questions. When you were growing up, what messages did your family and friends give you about sexual orientation, especially about LGBTQ? Have their views remained the same, or have they changed over time? What is your earliest memory regarding the existence of homosexuality or bisexuality? What messages did you receive from that experience? Who was the first LGBTQ person you ever met? What messages did you get from that person about LGBTQ people? What transgressions regarding sexual orientation make you uncomfortable? What were the rules in your family regarding gender? What gender transgressions make you uncomfortable? Try to think of myths or stereotypes that you've ever heard about LGBTQ people. What view did your childhood religious faith have regarding homosexuality and gender? Are your current religious views similar or different? If you do not have a particular religious tradition that you adhere to, what do you know about various religious beliefs regarding homosexuality and gender? Have you ever chosen not to speak up when you heard someone make an anti-gay joke or remark? Was it a situation in which you would have spoken up to if it had been another form of prejudice? What made speaking up difficult for you? What do you think it might be like for a person to discover that he or she is a lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender person in a society where the previous talked about beliefs, myths, and stereotypes are prevalent? Now take a minute to push pause and think about these values. This is one example that we have here about the way that oppressions intersect to create unique experiences that can't be understood without a comprehensive understanding of many factors. So you have to understand that there are lots of different ways that this example can work. And for this situation, we're talking about an LGBTQ youth of color. So they might experience homophobia within their own racial or ethnic group. They might experience racism within their own community of sexual orientation or gender identity. And then they might experience ageism within both of these different communities around their identity. Of course, there are many factors that affect every person, and these aren't the only ones, and these aren't the only ways. And these aren't true for everyone, but it's an example of how there might be more than one oppressive force pushing down on somebody at one time. Another way that we can talk about privilege the way we talk about safe spaces is by talking about privilege. And that's another way of understanding your attitudes, and by looking at an anti-oppression lens, is to think about it with your privilege. So think about the ways that you are privileged or that you hold places of privilege, and what you can do to kind of acknowledge your privilege and work in a way to not reject it, but to challenge your privilege. This is one example of a great way to talk about privilege, and it's called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh. It's a writing to talk about the ways that privilege might affect your life in ways that you might not think of. Now, this is specifically for white privilege, but I think that the idea can be turned into a lot of different privileges. So if you just think about, many white people might have privileges like being able to arrange to be in the company of people of their race most of the time because there might be a lot of people of their race around them. That people with privilege might be able to see themselves represented in media more readily, and people with racial privilege might be able to they don't have to think about racism if it doesn't directly affect them. And these are just some kind of clips from this reading that we have linked to at the very end of the section. Okay, so and here's another way to think about it, and this is the heterosexual questionnaire. It's very similar to the Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack that I just showed you, but this one is more about sexuality specifically. And so it's kind of putting the questions that people put onto LGBTQ folks and thinking about that in the opposite way. So when and how did you first decide you were heterosexual? If you have never slept with a member of your own sex, is it possible that you might be gay if you tried it? And why do heterosexual people try to seduce others into your lifestyle? And this is also linked to on the resource page, so you can look further into it. Another way that I like to go through these kind of ideas, or to go through checking our own values and thinking about assumptions that go into our attitudes, is with a scenario. So we're going to look at this scenario, and you can go ahead and use pause again to kind of take notes and jot down the misconceptions that are at play here. And I'm going to read the scenario for you. A young man of color enters a youth drop-in center, and a volunteer greets him. The young man intimates that he might be bisexual. The volunteer immediately recommends that the youth get an HIV test and gives him a handout about gang violence. Now go ahead and push pause and think about what misconceptions might be at play here. So this scenario has a lot of misconceptions that might be going on, and here are some that I thought of. These might not be the only ones to think about, but it was inherent that the volunteer thought that if the youth was thinking about his sexuality, then he must be having sex, and in that case he must be having gay sex, so that means that we need to check him for HIV because all gay people are obviously prone to HIV, which is obviously a misconception, and it doesn't make sense, and it's not necessarily inclusive of what the youth was coming to the center for. And then the other thing was that because this young man is a youth of color, that we assume that he must be involved in gang activity, because there's an assumption that all youth of color involve themselves in gang activity, which obviously is not true. So being able to make your space safer can begin with assessing your space, and that's what you're doing right now. By assessing your own values and attitudes, then you can assess your space. We have linked to the resources that I talked about before, more resources on the topic of attitudes. All the activities that we just went through you can find on the website, and you can find on the resource page, so that you can do these with people you're with. You can share them with the people around you, or you can look through them again and do some further reading. And here's our information for NYAC again, if you want to contact us, if you want to look further into our resources. And here is my information if you have any questions about anything that just happened in this section, and I encourage you to send me any questions. So you have just gotten through your part 2, and next you move on to part 3, which is about language.